From William Stickevers, Strategic Astrological Advisor.
What initiated in 2022, which was literally the end of the Pax Americana New World Order, we're seeing now a final capitulation playing out in 2023. And this has to do with the Pluto return, right? We had one of three Pluto returns. The first one initiated on February 20th, 2022. And it correlates with unprecedented watershed events in historical significance, systemic crises. It correlates with the imposition of collective compulsive power by government, by non-state actors. It correlates with populist resistance to authority through drastic action. It correlates with the destruction of an earlier mode of life. And we see here, looking at the broader orb impact of the USA independence Pluto return, it started in 2017, January 2017, on literally the day when Trump took office. So that should be a sign that Trump becoming president was really the beginning, the initiation of the nascent phase of this USA Pluto return. And you could see right now, we are at the peak of it in 2023, and that peak will continue throughout the year and will be in a waning phase and will continue all the way in terms of its impact into early 2028. Now, let's take a quick review. This is very important. We're going to set this up. Pluto rules empires. It rules hegemons. It also rules the 8 stages of empire. And if you basically take the date of when the United States started, during the time of the Declaration of Independence, you see on July 4th, 1776, you can just subdivide the pie into 8 sectors between the time of the Declaration of Independence until the moment of the first Pluto return based on the Declaration of Independence horoscope, which is on February 20th. And when you divide that out, you could see that these are very important years in U.S. history, and more importantly, the development of what I'm now calling the U.S. empire. And this method is based on John Glubb, who was a British Army officer. He wrote a book called The Fate of Empires, and he laid out the principles and causes why powerful civilizations and empires rise from nothing, only to either destroy themselves in the end or to undergo a reformation. And that's exactly what's playing out here. So if we just go back here, we're going to start in 1936 during the Pluto opposition Pluto period. And that was at the height of the Great Depression. But Pluto also rules nuclear power plants, nuclear weapons, all forms of nuclear reaction, nuclear ICBM weapons, strategic nuclear warfare, tactical battlefield nuclear weapons. And it was during this time that Pluto opposition Pluto, we see the emergence of nuclear power and the development of the atomic bomb that would ultimately be dropped within 9 years of that Pluto opposition Pluto. But the first moment in fission occurred around this date, 1936, in Chicago, where there was intense research going on with nuclear power and the development of an atomic bomb, which was all classified at that time. Also, Pluto rules fascism. What did we see back in the 1930s? The rise of Adolf Hitler, the ultra-nationalist political ideologies, centralized autocracy, militarism, hawkish foreign policy, left-wing authoritarianism, National Socialist Party, which was a progressive left socialist agenda with an authoritarian autocracy. We see authoritarian political leadership today with Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping of China. We see plutocracy in the United States. That is now the dominant form of the way governance occurs. We see rule by oligarchy, militarism, centralization of money and power, forcible suppression of opposition. Then we look at the next phase here in 1963. What happened in 1963? We see the beginning of the space race because Pluto rules space. All forms of space flight, spacefaring to be capable of and active in space travel, interplanetary space flight, interstellar travel, travel between stars or planetary systems. The space race began between the USSR and the United States. And we're seeing now a space race occurring today between the United States and China. The development of the Space Force, space-based weapon systems, space threats from terrestrial events, space threats from extraterrestrial events, and space as a war-fighting domain. So this is going to be a very dominant theme as we talk about 2023. Then we also note here in 1963 again, what happened. We see the rule of the deep state, the rise of the deep state. The deep state operates as a secret and subversive network whose members control foreign policy, diplomacy, military issues, and international spying agencies called intelligence agencies to further empower its interest in the name of national security. A powerful minority of people who control the military, industrial, and intelligence structure of the country, and it controls the organization that which finances the political careers of national officials, such as presidents, prime ministers, and members of the national legislature. So we see here the rise of the deep state, the Kennedy assassination. We've seen certain revelations pointing to that the CIA was directly involved based on unreleased data being corroborated by an insider who works within the CIA now. We're seeing that information coming to light. The rise of the deep state, influencing and manipulating democratic coalitions covertly within the government to ensure that specific special interests for the oligarchical elite are met with a seemingly democratic framework of the political landscape, meaning it looks democratic, the process, but it's all being manipulated as an intelligence operation. This will be very important and much more hidden in plain sight for those who can see in 2023. So we could see this vast intelligence network that's operating, essentially controlling the country. Then we get over into the 1982 period when Pluto here was in a backward square. This is the rise of the Reagan era, and we see the peak of the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union, geopolitical tension between the superpowers, ideological geopolitical struggle for global influence, psychological warfare, espionage, embargoes, currency wars, trade wars, technology wars, and competitions, the collapse of détente, and high-intensity proxy wars, very common during this period. We also see going forward, when we see Pluto moving into its terminal phase, into this collapse phase that started in 2000 and continued into the era we're in now, we see the period here correlating with the current global crisis that started in 2001. Now, I'm not talking about particularly the American fourth turning, although we will reference that. I'm talking about from this perspective, we're seeing this global general crisis, a period of widespread global conflict and instability. When there is widespread breakdown in politics, economics, and society, the crisis is caused by a complex series of demographic, religious, economic, and political changes and problems. An example of this going back in history is the crisis of the 3rd century within the Roman Empire, the general crisis of the 17th century. So we're seeing now this global crisis working within, at a deeper level, the American fourth turning crisis. Now, going back to that crisis, we need to understand the last time, the best model we have for the crisis is the Roman imperial crisis between 2016 and 284 AD, when the Pluto return occurred for the Roman Empire. It was its first Pluto return, and we saw a series of developments occur. There was a plague, an epidemic, a series of natural disasters. We also saw the Antonine plague, basically correlated at the time of the beginning of this crisis. We saw incursions of illegal immigration, the Roman Empire's ability to ward off barbarian invasions factored in. They had issues with famine. They had issues with farms becoming abandoned and unproductive. From a second and longer term, we see natural disasters, major climate change issues, variability of weather, hotter, drier summers, extremely cold winters meant less agricultural production, foreign invasions, attempted foreign invasions, hyperinflation, and currency debasement. Breakdown of Roman internal trade network began. So we see all of these things happening during that period. And the Roman Empire and the Pluto return signal the beginning of the chaotic period known as the crisis of the 3rd century, which brought the Roman Empire almost to the brink of collapse. So this is why it's very important. And what's also interesting is that the Roman Empire became a full-blown plutocracy by the time this transition was over. We see the Roman Empire still trying to portray itself, at least politically, as this very, they had a Senate, they had a balance of power, and then it became a full-blown plutocracy by the time this crisis was over. And that brings us now to where we are at today with this Pluto return, right? So the U.S. is facing all of these problems, very similar to what the Roman Empire was going through its Pluto return. And we're seeing lots of different ways where republics, remember, the Roman Empire was initially a republic that by the time it went through its Pluto return became a full-blown plutocracy and empire. And we're seeing now very similar things playing out with the United States today as we are full-blown into this Pluto return. So some of the things we'll touch on: big government, big tech, big media, big business, big society, modern warfare capitalism, universal basic income, middle-class deleveraging, human rights violations such as people being forced to take the vax in order to remain employed, in order to be able to collect their pensions, etc., censoring and deplatforming, disinformation spread by elected officials, election integrity issues, plutocracy, too big to fail, too powerful to jail, lemon socialism, crony capitalism. We don't have free market capitalism anymore. Since 2008, and especially now, we see crony capitalism, kleptocracy, modern monetary theory, applied perception management, totalitarian democracy, false flag events, excessive and punitive taxation. For example, Biden hiring 87,000 IRS agents, particularly for the purpose of auditing Americans. So the purpose of this was just to audit Americans and put more punitive taxation measures into place. So this is all what happened, very much similar to what happened with the Roman Empire.
For nearly 4 decades, William Stickevers has empowered business leaders, independent thinkers, and visionaries to navigate global shifts and critical turning points with clarity and confidence. His unique blend of advanced astrological techniques, macroeconomic insights, and strategic forecasting equips clients to stay ahead of the curve and thrive in uncertain times. Discover how William's in-depth forecasts, programs, and astrological consultations can help you make more confident, well-timed decisions and recognize opportunities others overlook. Visit williamstickevers.com for your strategic advantage in business, finances, and life.